US and South Korean forces have conducted their own ballistic missile test on the east coast of the Korean peninsula. It was part of a show of force in retaliation for the North's missile launch on Tuesday. There's been a ratcheting up of tensions between Pyongyang and Washington and Seoul after the rogue nation's latest launch. US experts say the new missile had a range of more than 8,000 kilometers, which means it could possibly reach Alaska. The UN Security Council is to hold an emergency meeting at Washington's request in the light of what the State Department has called a new escalation of threat. This year, North Korea has carried out a series of missile tests flouting international sanctions. Leader Kim Jong-un refuses to negotiate with the US until Washington abandons what he calls its hostile policy towards his country.
President Trump is blasting China ahead of a series of meetings in Europe where the North Korean threat will certainly be discussed. The president left Washington a short time ago. He will visit Warsaw, Poland before the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. In a tweet before he left this morning, the president claimed that China's trade with North Korea jumped this year and wrote, "So much for China working with us, but we had to give it a try." Major Garrett is in Warsaw, where the president arrives this evening. Major, good morning.
Good morning. The president will receive a warm welcome here and is anticipating an enormous crowd for his speech tomorrow on the future of the U.S.-Polish strategic alliance. That speech will also touch on something known as the Warsaw Uprising, the largest organized protest against Nazi Germany throughout all of Europe during World War II, an uprising that was mercilessly crushed by the Nazis, but is something that Poles take very seriously and the president wants to commemorate. While here, the president will also meet with the leaders of Poland and Croatia with an emphasis on protecting so-called frontline states threatened by Russia. There is a hope throughout Eastern Europe. Mr. Trump, while here, will reaffirm NATO commitments to defend any nation that faces aggression. The president then leaves for Hamburg, Germany, and the G20 summit. A big topic there, North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile test. That will include a meeting between the president and Chinese President Xi Jinping. President Trump has tried to encourage China to intervene with North Korea, but the results have been mixed at best. Another huge meeting, President Trump's first encounter with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Administration officials say there is no formal agenda and it will be determined, Jeff, entirely by, quote, whatever the president wants to talk about.
Well, this year's G20 summit promises to be very interesting indeed. The White House and the Kremlin have both confirmed that Presidents Trump and Putin will meet on the sidelines, though, after 6 months of Russia and Trump dominating the headlines and Moscow admitting that relations between the countries are at zero. However, it's much anticipated by other people that this will be the highlight of the entire summit. Well, what is it that they're going to be talking about? Well, first of all, there's Ukraine, and secondly, there's Syria, and that promises to be very thorny indeed after the White House came out with the unfounded allegation and indeed prediction that President Assad would use another chemical attack in Syria, an act which, I quote, Moscow said is an invitation for provocation. And then there's the G20 summit venue itself. It's been in Hamburg, where there's been protests, and demonstrators are saying there are going to be even more of them. And then there's a scandal amongst the policemen. The Berlin police were drafted in to help the Hamburg colleagues in providing security for the event, but hundreds of them have been sent home after a scandal where a party got out of hand, where public sex, fighting and striptease seemed to be the order of the night, and therefore inappropriate behaviour was the reason that they were sent back. And then there's President Erdogan's bodyguards. They've also been told not to come following the recent time in May when they were accused of beating up protesters outside the Turkish embassy in Washington. So all in all, this year's G20 promises to be very interesting indeed.
Now, a top Russian diplomat attending the new round of talks on Syria says an agreement could be reached which would see the Russian military deployed to Syrian buffer zones. The Alexander Lavrentiev has hinted that if agreed, Russian forces would be sent to Syria's borders within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Based on the new plan, 2 de-escalation zones would be created alongside the Syria-Turkey and Syria-Jordan borders, and the Russians would police them. There are no more details about the scheme, which should be hammered out by the Iranian, Russian and Turkish diplomats. The news comes as representatives of the 3 countries, plus Syria, are meeting in Kazakhstan's capital to resolve the conflict in the Arab country that entered its 7th year in March.
Syria's newest currency features a portrait of President Bashar al-Assad. The state-run Sana news agency reports 2,000-pound notes went into circulation Sunday, July 2nd, in several provinces, as well as the capital city of Damascus. Inflation is high and the value of the Syrian pound has been falling in recent years. At current exchange rates, 2,000 Syrian pounds are worth roughly $4 American. The war-torn country's central bank reportedly cited wear and tear on existing currency as the reason for the new note, which is the country's largest. This marks the first time Assad has appeared on Syrian money. One expert told the Washington Post that Assad is reasserting his authority by putting his face on the new bill.
City in ruins and on the cusp of being freed from the Islamic State group. This is what remains of Mosul's old city. Once the jihadist stronghold, the very place where the group declared their caliphate 3 years ago, there are now only a few hundred of Islamic State fighters left. Iraqi officials said they should be able to declare victory by the end of the week. But the final push to take Iraq's second city is proving difficult. Booby-trapped buildings in densely populated winding streets of the old city. Suicide bombers hiding as fleeing civilians. Men, women and children are asked to undress as they escape to make sure they're not carrying suicide belts. An Iraqi official said 7 women, all Islamist fighters, blew themselves up on Monday alone.
Most of the people who blew themselves up were women. The women suicide bombers detonated themselves near fleeing families. This is an evil and cowardly attempt by terrorists to inflict the greatest number of losses on civilians and security forces.
Even if Iraqi troops are on the verge of victory in Mosul, the battle against the Islamic State is far from over. While their presence is shrinking, the terrorist group still controls swathes of territory in Iraq and Syria.
Reuters has reported that on Wednesday, Philippine security forces arrested the main financier and logistics supporter of the pro-Islamic State militants who have for weeks been battling government troops for control of a southern town. The militants from a faction known as the Mata Group seized the town of Marawi on May 23rd and are resisting daily assaults by government forces using aircraft and artillery, and with help from allies, the United States and Australia. The fighting in the largely Muslim town in the south of the predominantly Christian Philippines has alarmed neighbors, fearful that Islamic State is bent on gaining a foothold in the region as it loses ground in the Middle East.
These children have stories few people around the world will ever hear. They've experienced one of the world's worst so-called forgotten wars. The conflict in South Sudan, which has seen fighting between government and opposition forces rage for the last 3 years. They managed to escape it and arrive at this refugee camp in Ethiopia. But the conflict is spreading and reaching areas of South Sudan previously untouched by the war, like central Equatoria, which used to produce huge amounts of the region's food. Amnesty International warns the region has now been turned into a killing field. UN has said the world has an obligation to intervene and protect civilians. But it's estimated that tens of thousands of people have been killed so far in South Sudan's civil war, and millions have been displaced. Attempts to halt the violence haven't worked, and the conflict is getting worse. Despite calls for immediate intervention and help, there's no real idea of what that intervention would look like, and if or when it will come.
Yemen is facing the largest cholera outbreak in the world. Almost 250,000 people have contracted the disease there since April, and 1 child every minute comes down with the disease.
The situation is extremely serious.
Cholera wouldn't have spread so quickly if it wasn't for the war. A Saudi-led coalition intervened in Yemen to oust Houthi rebels in 2015. The war has destroyed most of Yemen's health infrastructure. 19 million people need humanitarian aid to survive, and many are on the verge of starvation. Yemen's rich neighbors have the resources to provide help, but they're busy dealing with their own diplomatic disputes. While in this poor Arab nation, the cholera outbreak shows no sign of slowing down.
Scenes from a Hollywood thriller playing out in Sri Lanka. The hunt is on to eradicate mosquitoes carrying dengue fever. An outbreak has followed last month's monsoon rains. Pools of water and piles of rubbish that weren't cleaned up have become breeding grounds for mosquitoes. But local authorities have sent out workers to wipe them out. Symptoms of dengue fever include severe muscle and joint pain, high temperatures, severe headaches and a rash. The disease is transmitted when an infected mosquito bites a person. There's no treatment and patients must let the virus run its course. 400 soldiers and police have been deployed onto the streets. They're helping identify and clean up mosquito breeding areas and educating residents on how to avoid getting the illness. But for the families of those who've died during this outbreak, the cleanup has come too late.
Narendra Modi had the look of a man making up for lost time. It has, after all, taken nearly 70 years for an Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel, and he was keen to emphasize the deepening relationship between the countries.
It is my singular honor to be the first ever Prime Minister of India to undertake this groundbreaking visit to Israel.
ברוך הבא לישראל, ראש ממשלת הודו, ידידי נרנדרה מודי. My friend Prime Minister Narendra Modi, welcome to Israel. We receive you with open arms. We love India.
More than warmth, this visit is about advancing cooperation on agricultural and water technology and on weapons. It's estimated that India buys more than $1 billion worth of Israeli arms every year. It signed a new $2 billion deal for surface-to-air missiles in April. The Indian Prime Minister is being given similar treatment to Donald Trump just a few weeks ago, Benjamin Netanyahu making time to accompany him on almost all his engagements, including to a place of pilgrimage for all foreign leaders who come here, Israel's Holocaust Museum. But unlike President Trump and most foreign leaders, Modi won't be going to the occupied West Bank for a meeting with the Palestinian president. The Palestinian Authority says improved Israeli-Indian ties shouldn't come at its expense.
We expected him to visit both Israel and Palestine, to play an important role between the two sides and to be able to spread the message of peace. One should visit both.
Austria's ambassador has been summoned over the fact that Vienna has said it could deploy up to 750 troops to the border with Italy. They're ready to be deployed at any point, and it has already deployed a number of armed personnel carriers to the border, to the Brenner Pass, which is a mountainous pass between Italy and Austria. And that's because Austria is concerned about the growing influx of migrants to Italy, which may then cross its border into Austria. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that they will shore up their own borders if there is a continued influx of people moving northwards from Italy. Now, that's because in the last few years, 500,000 migrants have landed on Italian shores, many of them not wanting to stay in Italy. And if we look at the figures this year alone, the UN Migration Agency says around 100,000 migrants have landed on European soil from the Mediterranean Sea since January of this year, and the majority of those, more than 84,000, have landed in Italy alone. Started as a call for help by Italy, now looks like it could be turning into a diplomatic crisis as countries in the EU look to close their borders off with their EU counterpart, leaving Italy dwindling under the continued pressure of this migrant crisis.
With gun violence on the rise in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the availability of an application that tracks in real-time gun battles has shown effective, based on its many eyewitnesses, media, and police accounts. The Fogo Cruzado, or Crossfire application created by Amnesty International, aims to let Rio's citizens know where gunfire is taking place in the hopes of keeping them out of danger. The number of people killed by police in shootouts during the first 5 months of this year has jumped to nearly 50%. The free app hopes to alert many citizens near violent areas and save lives.
Our top story this half hour, growing outrage in Canada and in the United States. Reports are that a former Guantanamo Bay detainee will receive almost $8 million and an apology from Canada's Liberal government for his time in Guantanamo Bay in the U.S. prison Gitmo. Omar Kandar, a Canadian citizen, admitted to killing an American medic while fighting in Afghanistan in 2002. And he spent 10 years in Guantanamo Bay.
You know, this is another part of the Obama legacy in his scurry to, get Mo closed, which of course he absolutely never accomplished, even after repeatedly saying that he was going to. This is the fallout that the rest of the world has to endure. Now this known terrorist, a trained bomb maker who killed, as you said, an army medic, with a wife and children at home who've lived without him for 10 years now. Now this guy has millions of dollars to fund his next escapade. This should absolutely concern everyone who hears this story.
Meanwhile, a left-leaning website calling for true patriotism by urging Americans to fly the flag upside down.
To me, it's just another example of a whole group who don't want to accept the results of the election. They're upset with it. They don't like that President Trump is in office, and they'll do anything to oppose him, even denigrate the world's most well-known symbol of freedom.
So, this guy makes a humorous little video, and then it blows up. Someone edited it. Donald Trump found it and posted it on his Twitter feed. It got millions of views, hundreds of thousands of likes, and many people had a laugh. CNN did not like being laughed at, not one bit. They launched a manhunt for the original creator of the video. What they did is doxing. It is digging up private information on someone or something and then publishing it. It can be used for law enforcement, for business, extortion, coercion, harassment, online shaming, and vigilante justice. The reaction has been furious. Even Julian Assange has weighed in on the matter, saying that potentially what CNN did may be a crime.
A multi-billion-dollar TV network blackmailing a private citizen into not making funny videos about it is not journalism, CNN.
Dangerous wildfires are spreading across the western part of the country. Hot temperatures and dry brush are fueling the flames. At least 4 new fires were reported in Southern California yesterday. Another wildfire grew to more than 1,600 acres in northern Montana. Jamie Yukas shows us how conditions are expected to get even worse as the week goes on.
On 2.5 acres so far.
No rest late into the night Tuesday for Southern California firefighters.
This fire is burning uphill, and it is burning in some pretty thick brush.
A water-dropping helicopter worked into the early morning hours to try to contain the fire, which continued to burn about 20 miles east of Los Angeles. It came after a day of fighting fast-moving wildfires across the Southland. A wildfire in a farming community about 40 miles east of LA quickly grew to 40 acres Tuesday, burning at least one structure. People in the area had little warning.
It went up fast.
Those living here worked quickly to move their animals and livestock out of harm's way. About 10 miles to the south, another wildfire is burning. This fire quickly erupted to almost 400 acres. No structures were threatened. It's not expected to be contained until sometime later today.
Ventura County Fire that has their hands full with this.
And this brush fire west of Los Angeles snarled holiday traffic after coming dangerously close to the busy 101 freeway.
Really frightening here for some motorists.
Officials say the fire burned 50 acres. The hot, dry conditions are expected to continue this week, with temperatures reaching the 90-degree mark.
Authorities in China say at least 56 people are dead and 22 are missing from ongoing floods in the south. Hail and landslides have added to the misery in 11 southern provinces. Officials say flights were canceled at a number of major airports, stranding thousands of passengers. The famous Orange Isle tourist attraction in Hunan province was awash in deep floodwaters. River levees collapsed in Hunan, forcing mass evacuations. Conditions are expected to get even worse. The forecast calls for more rain this week in the flooded region.
An analysis of 2016 U.S. fertility data shows that nurseries should have some extra space in the near future. Just over 6% of women ages 15 to 44 gave birth in 2016. That rate decreased by about 1% compared with 2015 and has some researchers concerned about the population. There are a few reasons why the birth rate is getting lower. For one, teen births went down 9%. That's seen as a positive, as studies show the children of teen moms are often at a disadvantage to their peers. years. But women in their 20s also aren't having as many bundles of joy either. Researchers think that could be due to economic uncertainty. Couples tend to have fewer children when the future of the economy is up in the air. Instead, the birth rate was buoyed by older women. Rates for women between the ages of 40 and 44 went up by 4%. Researchers expect the overall U.S. birth rate to bounce back when there's more economic certainty.
Good morning, sir.
The film I, Robot, which aired in 2004, depicts a world of 2035, where robots have become a regular feature of people's daily life. In the movie, Detective Dale Spooner had a little conversation with the robot Sonny.
You are just a machine, an imitation of life. Can a robot write a symphony? Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece? Can you?
The truth is that even now in 2017, artificially intelligent programs are already able to write songs and do a lot of other things. This is just a Shanghai factory making aircraft components, but through the dim blue lights, you can see robotic arms working on the assembly line. This workshop used to need 15 workers, but now it only needs 3, and there are maintenance workers who just check on it from time to time. Factories like this are taking the place of the original workshops in cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen. While it's all more efficient for the companies to use robotic workers, what about the jobs that used to be held by people here, which are now gone? Robots replacing humans in lower-end jobs might be the last thing we have to worry about, however.
What you and I do is so complicated.
In science and fiction TV shows and movies, AI technology is often portrayed as having evolved into something to be feared. And even in real life, these concerns have turned out to have a bit of truth in them. It took Microsoft's AI chatbot Tay less than 24 hours to become racist and sexist. The company had to take it offline after Tay was discovered sending offensive online messages.
When companies are designing its AI technology and apply it to industrial use, they need to think about whether their algorithm is reliable and whether they have accurate training data. No matter what they do, they need to make sure that the technology is in line with human and society's moral code and standard.
Wang says that although governments around the world have been keeping a close eye on the development of AI technology, the real power still lies in the discretion of the companies developing them. Just as scientist Stephen Hawking warned, the use of AI could also be the last invention of humanity, unless we learn how to avoid the risks.